Welcome back to part 4 of the Michael Holman interview. And, you know, if you haven't checked it out yet, check out part 1, part 2 and part 3, because Michael is dropping some serious hip-hop history here. I mean, it's absolutely mind-blowing, you know, what the stories he's coming out with. It's absolutely amazing. And also, please check out my other interviews with like Public Enemy, DJ Cuba, DJ Cash Money. And also please subscribe to this channel, because I've got so many interviews lined up. It's going to blow your mind. So please subscribe to this channel. Oh yeah, by the way, I also interviewed Scheme and T-Kid as well, which is absolutely fantastic. So please check out Scheme and T-Kid's interview as well. But anyway, sit back and please enjoy the ride. We're going back to Michael and we're going to be talking about Graffiti Rock as well as, other little bits and pieces. Peace. Let's talk about Graffiti Rock. I mean, Graffiti Rock was a TV program which was released in 1984 and featured Run DMC and Jam Master Jay, Jimmy Jazz, Shannon, Cool Mo D and Special K from the Treacherous Three, and the incredible New York City Breakers, and of course yourself, Michael, as like the host with the most. So can you kind of tell me, you know, who come up with the idea of Graffiti Rock?
Oh, it was my idea. I mean, I always wanted. Remember the story I told last time about bringing my hip hop review to Ruza Blues club at the Grill, which was really Cosmo from the Clash's, spot. It was his night that this Jamaican club let him have. He passed on to Blue, and then she asked me to bring my hip hop review to. So that was exciting because that was really the first true hip hop club, because even though there had been hip hop clubs uptown in the Bronx years before, they didn't have all the elements. So, my whole experience with creating a hip hop nightclub at the Grill started in 81. This is early on and in the game, in the hip hop game. And so I really feel, as a person who's about 26 by this point, and I feel like I've seen a lot, been around a lot, I've had a lot of success for myself in entertainment. I just knew that this movement, this culture that we would call hip hop about 6 months later, it needed, in order for it to really stick, in order for it to have real power, it needed to have a presence on television. It had to have its own show, like Ready, Steady, Go, or American Bandstand, or Soul Train, or any of these Shindig, any of these television shows that were created specifically for a teenage audience, really, with a new movement, and all those shows that I mentioned before were really there for rock and roll. Soul Train was created for a soul musical audience and vibe, blah, blah, blah. So I just thought, I didn't even, to be honest, I didn't even think that it needed it. I really believed in my heart at that time, this is just all gonna happen. Hip hop is gonna blow up. This whole thing is just gonna go worldwide. And I want to be the one who brings it to television first. That was my first thought. So in 81, when I was doing the Grill with Ruza Blue, and we were starting to have conflict over, how to run this. And, I looked at it as my thing, because these were all my artists that I'd been working with and bringing downtown a year before. And a year was a long time back in those days. I look back on it as this kind of competition, this kind of enmity and competition between the two cities of New York and London. Like, who's cooler? Who's got the hippest music, the hippest fashion, and all the, and in some cases, it's very obvious as to who's cooler and who isn't. But there was always this competition, there's always this edge between our two cities. A lot of love.
Big
a
time.
lot of
yeah,
love.
big time.
But a lot of pride and a lot of we're cooler and we're cooler. And to be honest, that competitive sometimes spilled out into anger, sometimes spilled out into recrimination and you know, negative words and whatever. It was good because it created this tension, this competitive intention that pushed us to be even better and better and better. You know, and London pushed New York, and New York pushed London, and London pushed New York. You know, we were good for that. And who else could do that? But what was good about it was I was looking for my own voice as an impresario, as a presenter, right, in hip hop. And I thought, this is like the most perfect thing for television. This is such a visual movement. I mean, the dance is mad visual. The writing, graffiti is mad visual. Scratching, everything is great for visual. It's great for sound, rapping, music. It's such a perfect thing to be contextualized and put and presented on as a television show, as a movement. And so early on, as early as 81, late 81 into 82, I was planning on and actually doing all the work to create a hip hop television show. The first thing that happened was I was living at the time with my roommate, Nick Taylor, where Jean-Michel Basquiat lived in the same apartment on East First Street in East Village. And I'll never forget finding out that Manhattan Neighborhood Network, which is like a public access cable public access thing. It only goes to like small number of neighborhoods. It doesn't go very far. It's very low budget. I don't know if they have that in England. So I had heard about openings for Manhattan Neighborhood Network for cable for public access shows, and so I applied, and I thought, oh, this could be an opportunity for me to exercise my idea of having a hip hop show. And so in 82, I was given an opportunity to have a 45-minute long show, or maybe it was a half an hour show, in which I would have to deliver each week a, or whatever, 30-minute long, 3/4 inch cassette tape. I don't know if you know what they look like.
No.
Hang on. So every week I deliver to them a 3/4 inch cassette tape. That's what this looks like. Very ancient technology with 3/4 inch tape inside.
Wow, look at that.
Yeah, audio visual tape. Let me put that back in. Correct.
Is that Michael? Is that the one from Graffiti Rock?
No, but I actually have one. This cassette here is This cassette here is also 3/4 inch. Same kind of. Again, this is like ancient technology. Nowadays, we can just make a video file and send it over internet. But this is a second generation master of Graffiti Rock.
Can you turn it around so I can see the cover of it?
Oh, well, here's the label. Here's the cover.
Wow.
Yeah. But anyway, getting back to the public access shows. So my very first step into eventually bringing Graffiti Rock to television was creating 3/4 inch cameras, with 3/4 inch cameras, creating these videotape shows of me kind of hosting and then cutting to all kinds of like things like arty short films that I made, creative artistic short films that I made, interviews with people like Jazzy J from Zulu Nation. I had performances by Dougie Fresh. I had these dance shows that were kind of like Graffiti Rock. Kids at the school of visual arts, they let me use their basement, which had like a video studio in it, and I would invite a bunch of young kids to show up and dance and film them and kind of create this kind of Ready, Steady, Go show, but there would be a dance audience as well inside the show. with performances, with DJs. I had Jazzy Joyce, one of the first early female DJs. If I can go through a list of some of the artists that were on my hip hop shows in '82. So Jazzy Joyce, one of the first female hip hop DJs, Dougie Fresh, Grand Mixer DST, and the Infinity Rappers, Phase 2, Futura, DJ High Priest, Dougie Fresh, New York City Breakers, Rocksteady, Dynamic Rockers, the graffiti of Ram LZ, and like I said, Phase 2 and Futura. So I had like a lot of the really early pioneers of hip hop on these early public access TV shows that would air, like I said, on public access stations, which were part of the cable system, not on regular TV. You had to be a subscriber to get these shows. They might have literally reached only 10 or 20,000 people total. That was it, not a lot of people. And so I did that for about 3 or 4 months, but I stopped doing it because it became difficult because I couldn't run commercials on the show. And since I couldn't run commercials, and this was free to the public, I wasn't able to generate any money. And since I couldn't generate any money for making them, I couldn't sustain it. I couldn't just keep coming out of pocket when I'm a starving artist myself. I mean, it was just impossible to do. So I ended up doing, let's see, On Beat TV, TV New York, and the J. I did about 3 or 4 shows. Not those many. Did about 3 or 4 of these shows. They're now in the Library of the Performing Arts at Lincoln Center, the Jerome Robbins Dance Division, where my archives are. So they're saved for posterity. Well before the end of '82, as I'm doing this very low budget public access television programming and broadcasting, I'm thinking, I'd already been thinking the big time, on regular television. That was always my goal. And it was so magical those times. That's how powerful hip hop was. Everybody was talking about it. Everyone was excited. All kinds of people, investors, were thinking about how they could get involved. And I was meeting people. Actually, I met this guy, Paul McCraven, who was a black attorney from Boston who was involved in Streetwise Records and was a partner with Arthur Baker, who's a good friend of mine, who we all know. Arthur Baker did Planet Rock and was the owner of Streetwise Records. And Streetwise put out New Edition, right? And everybody who was anybody would come to the grill and you'd meet people. That's how we all met and became friends and started working together and coming up with ideas. In New York was traditionally at nightclubs. That's where you met. You hang out at nightclubs, you meet people. Next thing you know, you got a partnership. You're starting a new band. You're with a gallery. You're coming up with new ideas, or next thing you know, you have a partner helping you bring your TV idea, all because you were going out. Going out was important. So this guy, Paul McCraven, thought that my hip hop public access TV show and my dream of doing a real hip hop TV show on networks was a great idea. He brought it to the Streetwise investors, a guy named Steve Mamishian and Bob Alexander. Steve Mamishian and Bob Alexander were the first two, and these guys were like big time, Wall Street investors, kind of like, people in London, you'd say that, people that work in the city, right? These are like big time Wall Street investors, and they saw the value in it, and they said, we want to help you bring your idea to the TV screen. And so I started organizing a script. I started writing a script for the show and started to plan out what the show would be like, who would be on the show, what kind of staging there'd be, what it would look like, what it would sound like, et cetera, what kind of records would be played. And as all these things started to develop, I started started to learn how much of this would be on a business level and the practical level would be important to plan out and to approach and attack strategically. So like, for example, the records you play on a show, you have to, like when you play record on the radio, you have to pay licensing and publishing.
Like royalties, yeah.
Royalties, exactly, to the writers of the music, people that own the publishing rights. So that's an issue. And when we approached the people that owned the James Brown publishing rights, because I wanted to have like James Brown through the whole show, him being, the godfather of hip hop, hip hop stands on his shoulders. When we approached his publishing team or whoever owned his publishing rights, it might not have even been him. They wanted, a lot of money for each use. I think it was like $1,000 or something, which was too much for us. And then a lot of other people who we did use their songs believed in the show and gave and allowed us to use their songs for nominal fees, like just $1, just to show respect and love. And when I approached Russell Simmons about who I'd known, and again, this was a very small community in New York, and everybody knew each other and respected each other. He respected me. I was his equal at that time. Years later, he would blow up and become a giant in entertainment, and I was kind of an also ran. But he became a giant. But at the time, in '83, when this is starting to bubble up, he and I are equals, in terms of like what of the moves we're making in hip hop. And when I asked him if Run DMC could perform on this show, and when he saw that we had money and this was going to happen, he was like, Michael, sure. Didn't have to pay for them. That was all for free. But of course, we'd have to pay for a studio to shoot in. We'd have to pay for cameramen and all the equipment and all those different things that had a lot of costs involved. But so anyway, getting back to the beginning, getting these investors, they had to then, what's interesting is they had to get about 10 investors to invest about $10,000 just to get enough money, about $100 and some thousand to get the first step of shooting Graffiti Rock. And this was a time, interestingly enough, when you could invest as much as 10 grand or more in an art project like a film or a television show or whatever it was, and get that written off your taxes, get that as a tax write-off. And Ronald Reagan, soon after Graffiti Rock came out, Ronald Reagan killed that opportunity. So I was lucky. I got underneath the wire. So it was, to make things easier for people who don't understand all that stuff about taxes. I'm not good at it either. But the point is I was able to take advantage of a law that made it easy to get investors, because it made it easy for them to profit off of giving us the money.
Yeah.
We raised a bunch of money from individuals, small-time investors, not rich people. We had a lot of meetings. I told them that I wanted the show to be in a studio, not outside or not in a park or, and I'll tell you, sometimes I look back and I think maybe I made a mistake. Maybe it should have been
outside in the park and
in the jams and like where hip hop started, in different places, interviews, kind of like what happened with Yo MTV Raps was kind of all over the place, But you try things, you don't know what's going to work. So I knew I wanted to have it kind of like a Ready Steady Go or a
Soul Train type thing,
or a Soul Train in a studio with a dancing audience, with b-boys and b-girls and kids dancing, and then artists performing. And I wanted graffiti artists doing things, and I wanted, DJ battles, and I had all these things planned out. Of course, we couldn't do all those things in the pilot, but that, of course, was where I eventually saw the thing going. Like one episode would be dedicated to DJ battles, another, turntablist battles. Another episode would be dedicated to a b-boy. I mean, I had in mind a New York City Breaker and a Rocksteady crew battle and different crews battling and writers getting to do whole exhibitions, film them actually doing a burner or whatnot, having MC battles. We kind of had one in the first episode of Graffiti Rock, but it wasn't the hardcore battle that I envisioned. So I'm writing the script and what's going to happen, and now one of the important things is to find the host. And my first idea was Mr. Magic, who was the host of, was one of the first hip hop, maybe the first hip hop radio DJ on the air in New York. And we just didn't, I don't know what happened. I mean, I don't know that we really even reached out to him. I'd also thought very seriously about asking Fab Five Freddy to host the show, which is interesting because years later he'd become the host of UMTV Raps. But what's interesting is 2 years before, on my cable access shows, Freddy did a hosting stint. So he did host one of my cable access shows, which is really, really interesting and prescient of me. So, we're dealing with the host. We're dealing with a lot of moving parts, on top of which, getting now into 83, 84, I'm a producer and a choreographer for Beat Street. And I'm writing my book, Breaking. And I'm doing all kinds of merchandising deals with Mattel. I mean, I am so busy in hip hop by 83, 84. It's insane. It's crazy. It's mad. I was juggling so many balls in the air, man. It was really juggling chainsaws, it felt like. But I was so busy that perhaps the planning phase of Graffiti Rock may have suffered a little bit, but I had a lot of help, like Vincent Gallo, right? My good friend Vincent Gallo at the time. I relied on him to help me get the dance audience together while I'm in France promoting Beat Street at the Cannes Film Festival. So, quickly fly back, work. I mean, it was working on all these different things at the same time. All these different hip hop projects at the same time. We would have had a more street audience if it wasn't for the fact that, we approached a lot of people from Brooklyn and whatever, hardcore audience, the hip hop audience is more Black, more Puerto Rican, who were like, what are you talking about? They didn't know what Graffiti Rock was. Nobody knew what it was. Nobody knew anything. Really, they knew who I was, but they didn't know, what are you talking about, hip hop on TV? That was so antithetical. I mean, how are you gonna get hip hop on TV? The idea of putting hip hop on TV seemed like such a wild ambition, a wild dream. That's never gonna happen. So a lot of the people that we would ask, that we would approach at Roxy's were like, no. Now, of course, once they saw the show, everyone was ready to be on the show. But trying to get just the right people on the show in the beginning, when no one knew what it was very difficult. So the casting of the crowd, of the audience, was difficult.
How about one of the dancers? You had Debi Mazar, who was one of the actresses in the film Goodfellas. But how did Debi get the role, and also Josephine as well? How did they get the part as being one of the dancers in the crowd?
Well, the interesting thing about Debi Mazar, you have to understand that the downtown scene, which was very much before hip hop really happened, during the Mud Club days, in 1979, 1980, the height of the Mud Club, our whole style, our whole fashion was kind of 1930s, 1940s thrift shop, kind of street, kind of old school jazz, bebop kind of look. We were into new wave, no wave music, and all kinds of stuff like that. And Debi Mazar, she was so cool that people let her in. She dressed cool. she'd show up with a saxophone to the club, and people would just say, oh, okay, she was this really cute girl. And so she just got in everywhere. And she became, well before she was old enough to get into the club, she became a fixture at all the clubs. We were all friends. We all loved each other. And Debi was one of the maybe 20 to 30% of the downtown scene in 1981, who, when they saw me and Freddy bringing all of this hip hop stuff downtown, got turned on. And Debi started like rocking, hip hop look. And Debi started going out with Kel One, one of the most famous and important writers, graffiti artists today. Kel One, whose brother is Mayor, who runs the graffiti, museum down in Miami. But so Debi Mazar is going out with this Puerto Rican cat, Kel One, and we're all like homies. And she was also Debi was also on one of my cable access shows in the audience. So it was only natural for me to invite her onto the natural progression of Graffiti Rock. And Vince Gallo was one of my best friends at the time. So, and he was like younger than me by about 4 or 5 years, and always eager to help me with my projects, and was brilliant and was so helpful in everything that we did. He was my assistant manager for the New York City Breakers too.
And
Sometimes
Vince was rocking the white Kangol turned up, wasn't he? He was like one of the poppers.
Exactly. Vince was such a big, he was also one of the people on the downtown scene who embraced hip hop early and hip hop fashion. Named himself a hip hop name, Prince Vince. Had a big burner done for himself in his neighborhood in Little Italy, big graffiti burner. But at a certain time, New York City Breakers were so big that we would have conflicting schedules. We'd have a gig in Venezuela at the same time we'd have a gig in Kansas. So I would split the crew up, or in Norway. And I'd split the crew up, and Vince would be the manager and take them to Venezuela. And then I would take the crew to the other half of the crew to Norway. And so, he worked with me with in a lot of different ways, a lot of projects. And so the fact that he helped me behind the scenes on the show, was a dancer on the show. And then I used him, I asked his name, and he helped me introduce Run DMC. Was no surprise. So, and that was indicative of, and Debi and Vince being on the show was indicative of the fact that so many white kids on the downtown art scene got hip to hip hop early and embraced it. And by the way, and I've always said this, hip hop would not have happened, certainly the way it did happen. It would not have happened if people like myself and Fab Five Freddy and Charlie Ahern and Henry Chalfont, if we had not brought hip hop downtown to present to the downtown art scene, a fine art music scene downtown, and then turned them on the way we turned on my bandmate Nick Taylor, High Priest, the way we turned on Debi Mazar, the way we turned on Vince Gallo into Prince Vince, and made them embrace hip hop. If we hadn't done that, and with the BBC having affiliates and having reporters and having crews in New York downtown, and the Japanese NHK Tokyo having crews downtown, and Canal Plus having crews downtown, and ZEF and the Italian stations having film documentary crews downtown looking for something to film on what's going on in New York, and we'll do a little story and then send it back to air on the BBC. I mean, that's normal, right? I'm sure you see that to this day. Well, they're not going to go to the Bronx. So since we brought that culture downtown on my TV shows, at the Grill, at the Mud Club, all these different places, these foreign film crews could show up film it, do a story, bring it back to London, bring it back to Tokyo, bring it back to Paris in as early as 82. And the next thing you know, people in London are hip, and people in Paris and Tokyo are hip to this budding culture out of the Bronx before they're really hip to it in Philadelphia. Because of that, because of New York being an international media center.
So really, Michael, it was the impact of one of the big impacts was the downtown scene spreading, that kind of hip hop knowledge to the world through the media.
Well, yes. Well, yes. It's the downtown scene bringing the hip hop culture downtown, and it's like a virus, right? It's like the coronavirus. We brought the virus downtown, and first it spread at the clubs, at our clubs, where we were the impresarios. We would put these artists on and present them to an audience of our peers, of our downtown arty peers, like my band Gray. There was a bunch of other bands in New York that were new wave, no wave, and the fashion kids downtown, and the artists and the actors and the filmmakers downtown would see it. And then there'd be a buzz. Then people start talking. Next thing you know, the BBC producer who's going out anyway, he's going out every night anyway, right? He's starting to hear about it, and he or she is going, hey, why don't we do a story about these kids who are spinning on their heads? And the next thing you know, it's spreading out to the rest of the world.
And then now it's become like a worldwide phenomenon. I mean, it's just literally, pretty much every single country in the world, it lives and breathes hip hop. I mean, graffiti, b-boy and breaking, all the elements are going on everywhere. It's incredible.
So anyway, back to Graffiti Rock. So now we're in the planning stage, and like I said, we're collecting records that we can play. I got Bambaataa involved early because don't forget, I'm bringing him downtown. I wrote about him in the East Village Eye and used the term hip hop in a publication first when I did that interview with Bam. So I know Bam really well. So I asked him to be an advisor on the show. He advised to have Jimmy Jazz be the DJ. And as an advisor, Bam suggested a Tats Crew / Zulu Nation writer, which was Brim. He's part of the Tats Crew. I mean, they're an amazing writing crew. I know the New York City Breakers are going to perform as my crew. Vince Gallo, letting him worry about the dance audience. And then finally we set a time, I think it was in the winter of 83, 84, into January or February like that. And we shot it up in a place in East Harlem, in a studio, I think on 96th Street, I forget the name of the studio. And we set it up, and it was interesting. We were looking for a director who could direct the show. And I finally settled on the director. I loved his credits. He had directed the TV wedding scene in the King of Comedy, another Scorsese film, funny enough. And in that film, there's this wedding scene where Scorsese marries his lover, who was Diane Abbott, who's now an old friend of mine. But if any of you saw the film King of Comedy, there's this short moment in which Robert De Niro marries his girlfriend, and there was a separate director, not Scorsese, who directed that because it was all on TV monitors. And so I thought, wow, that's cool. You have a cred of being with Scorsese. So we hired him. The interesting thing, again, the most important critical aspect about this was, no one had ever put hip hop elements on TV before, other than just little news stories. There was never any concerted effort to put a show together that had everything on. And so, a lot of people who could have helped us make the show even better weren't willing to because they just didn't know what the hell we were talking about. It's like, what is this? That's number one. Number two, we didn't have a lot of money to invest. All in all, you know, I'm happy with the outcome of the show. Always thinking that this is just a pilot. This will get on the air. And once we get the show going, oh man, first thing I'm going to do is replace myself. I'm going to get Fab Five Freddy or somebody else to be the host. I really wanted to get someone else so that I could be behind the scenes and watching what's going on and having a better control of what's going on. Because when you're in front of the camera, it's hard to control what's going on. You're busy trying to perform, and there's a lot going on that you could do a better job if you were behind the scenes producing. But I was sure that it would get picked up. I was just so confident.
It was a brilliant, absolute brilliant program. Also, Michael, how did you come up with the name Graffiti Rock?
Okay, well, that's another thing I meant to say. So the name Graffiti Rock, quite honestly, was a unconscious theft on my part. The original use of that term Graffiti Rock was by Henry Chalfont, who's a filmmaker, hip-hop pioneer, impresario like me, but was there years before me. Guy's amazing person. That he's one of the unsung heroes of hip-hop that hip-hop culture owes so much to. Henry Chalfont. Older guy who at that time was already married and had kids and was a filmmaker and was just kind of like me, looking for something interesting to capture on film, and discovered this culture, this movement, uptown New York. First through graffiti was his thing. Anyway, he put on in the East Village an event at a community center that had Ram LZ, Fab Five Freddy, and the Rocksteady crew, and I forget what DJ, but he had all the elements of hip hop, like I had at Negril, and like I had opening up for Bow Wow Wow 6 months later or something. He was there before. He was there earlier. He had this event. He called it Graffiti Rock. And what happened was the event never happened. It was going to happen. It was a free event, a community event. But what happened was, I don't know how or where this beef came from, but Rocksteady crew had a beef with this Dominican gang called the Ball Busters from Harlem. And the Ball Busters had found out about this event, and they showed up before it ever opened, and almost a fight broke out, but it wasn't even a fight because the Ball Busters came in and those guys kind of ran, and you know, they weren't ready to fight the Ball Busters, and it was just chaos. And this Graffiti Rock event that Henry Chalfont had planned, which actually they got pictures of it into the Village Voice, the newspaper, downtown newspaper. It just fizzled out. It didn't happen. I actually went to that event, excited to see it, and got there, and there was nobody there. Like I said, everyone ran. And outside the event was a B-boy crew called IBM, Incredible Breakmasters. And I was like, hey, what is this thing about breaking? This would have been 1980. And I was like, do you guys break? Yeah, we're break dancers. Can you spin on your head? Show me. And they were like, well, we're not going to spin on our head here on the sidewalk. And then I got to know them. I exchanged numbers with them so that I could later on film them. And so I actually became manager. I became the manager for my first managerial role and filmmaking role in hip hop was with IBM, Incredible Breakmasters, at this aborted event called Graffiti Rock in 1980. So that's where the name Graffiti Rock had been implanted in my brain. So now, 3 years later, when I'm looking for a name to name my show, Graffiti Rock comes to me. And as any creative person, maybe other people won't understand this, non-creative people won't understand this, but creative people will agree with me and understand. These things happen because creative people are always dealing with creative ideas all the time, and they're getting mishmashed up in their heads. Bottom line is, if I'm anything, I'm a super creative person, and I work in a lot of different fields. doing a lot of different things. And I need no help from anybody, especially when it comes to writing, for ideas, for titles, for concepts. I don't need anybody's help. I'm super creative. Now, you may not like what I come up with, may be whack to you, that's okay, but I'm an original creative person. And so that's why I know it was a subconscious thing, because there's no way I would use somebody else's idea. Number one, my ego would be too big to just use or steal somebody else's idea, number one. And number two, my ego and my confidence as a creative person is too great for me to not just come up with another name. And number three, I would venture to say there must be 50 to 100 good names to use for an early hip hop show. Why would I pick a name that was already used? But I did. I used Henry Chalfont's Graffiti Rock, and he was totally cool with it. I mean, Henry Chalfont, that's another thing about Henry, which is probably why he's not as well known as he should be, because he's such a mellow, cool guy who is not, jealous or competitive, or, he just wants the best for all these artists. Like I said, he was kind of older than everybody else. He was kind of like a big brother or a father figure to a lot of these cats. And so he was always there as support. And so when years later I apologized to him about using the name that he came up with, he was like, "Oh man, don't worry about it, man."
Yeah, he's a great guy. I'd absolutely love to interview Henry Chalfont. That would be absolutely incredible.
Yeah, he would be an amazing interview because he knows so much.
Also,
anyway,
Michael, I was going to say to you as well, are you still in touch with like Debi Mazar or Vince? Yeah. How about, there was another girl called Josephine as well. She was another dancer. What happened to Josephine? And
okay, now Josephine's a whole other story. I know Debi and Vince because I'm a downtown artist, right? I mean, in spite of the fact that I'm going uptown checking out the Bronx, I'm also very much a downtown artist. I had a band with Jean-Michel Basquiat. That's a very downtown thing. Vincent Gallo was in the band, et cetera, et cetera. That's how I know Debi and Vince. Josephine's another story. Josephine was a young dancer who I met incidentally when I did my first, I forgot to tell you about the first real professional high-end attempt at making something that would be short, like only 4 or 5 minutes long, but that looked like what I wanted Graffiti Rock to look like, so that we could show investors.
You told me this, your short film. We got that in I think it's part 3.
Right. Right. That's the Bronx River Throwdown film.
Yeah.
So in that film, you see Josephine.
That's right. She's doing a bit of dancing, and yeah.
She's one of the dancers in that film. And so when I saw her, months later, I thought, oh my God, this girl's so cute and she's a great dancer. I've got to get her into Graffiti Rock. And by that time, which blows my mind because we still talk, I didn't realize this at that time because I'm so busy doing a million different things in hip hop. At that time, she's doing McDonald's commercials as a dancer and doing all these early kind of hip hop oriented commercial projects. So she was busy and had a little career going. So, so that's how I got Josephine. But, then we do the show and it airs in the summer of '84 in June, gets good ratings, Nielsen ratings. In other words, like how they can judge how many people are watching. The numbers were fine. So by that winter, every December it's still to this day, at the end of the year in December in Las Vegas, there's a convention called NAPD in which all producers of television entertainment go to show, they have like little kiosks and booths, right? And you go walking around like those high-tech conventions where you walk around to see what the latest invention is type thing. So they have it for television programming in Vegas every year at this place called NAPTE, which means National Association of Producers of Television Entertainment, something like that. And that's where you go and you show your film on some kind of monitor, and people walk around and go, "Oh, what's that? I'll buy that for my region." And people walk around and buy this entertainment. I always thought NBC or CBS or ABC, the heads of those national networks, bought for the entire country, but that's not how it works, or that's not how it used to work. How it used to work back in the 80s was whoever was the station manager for the Chicago area for NBC, he or she bought their programming for that area. And it could be completely different for the programming like 500 miles away. So it was our goal and it was our imperative. We had to sell the show to at least a certain amount of station managers around the country to make it viable, to make it worthwhile. And we were having a hard time selling it because a lot of these station managers who were like white, male, in their 40s, middle age, had no idea what they were looking at. And most of them were saying at NAPTE was, "Well, what is this? We already have Soul Train. Why do we need this?" That was one criticism they had. And then our answer was like, "No, this is not the same thing. This is about New York. This is about hip hop. This is Soul Train is nothing like that. This is gonna, blah blah blah. All the reasons that we today know why hip hop, why Graffiti Rock and Soul Train are completely different." But of course, that fell on deaf ears. Nobody really understood the difference. Not many people did. Number two, their big criticism was, well, now this is like 84, right? Well, this rap thing, which had been on their radar maybe only a year and a half at this stage, this rap thing is a passing fad. It's going to die out. It's not going to stay around. That's how, you have to understand, that's how people saw rap and hip-hop.
Yeah. They just thought it was like a fad. It was like, going to last about 3 or 4 years and finished.
But back then, it was still such a racially, entertainment, radio and all that was so racially polarized. I guess it still is. That's why you still got to wear the gear, right?
Yeah.
So, and everybody in control, and it's probably still that way, are all white, male, middle-aged, and have their own agendas. So we couldn't get anyone to buy the first year. Then we went back a second year. And at that stage, I think the LA market said that they would buy if the Chicago market bought it. The Chicago market said, we'll buy if the New York market buys. And so now, if the New York market would buy it, and again, this is like so early on, like people weren't thinking about putting hip hop culture on TV. The whole thing unraveled. And I wish I'd gone back again a third year, third time's a charm, but we didn't. And I moved on. And what's interesting is when Graffiti Rock tanked, which would have been around 85, which when we knew that we couldn't keep going back to NAPTE and we weren't going to get Graffiti Rock on the air as a series. We got the pilot on that one time. But when we realized it wasn't going to air as a series, it was 85 going into 86. And my life started changing in a big way. The B-boy gigs for the New York City Breakers started to die out. One of the last big gigs actually was in London when we performed with the London Contemporary Dance Trust and the Alvin Ailey dancers at a Royal Opera House in Covent Garden, which was a pretty amazing thing to do with Prince Andrew, Randy Andy at the time, which he's living up to his name, by the way, as we are starting to see in the news, right? Pretty scary. But I was sitting in the booth with him up in the big royal box watching the New York City Breakers perform in '86. But that was one of the last big gigs. After that, everything that I was involved in terms of hip hop, dancing, writing, rap and turntablism as a culture, as a multifaceted culture, cohesive culture, that was starting to die out. And by 1985, 86, you had people like Russell Simmons and other people, smarter people in the music business saying that graffiti, breakdancing, turntablism, that's not making any money for me. The hell is that? We're going to put everything behind the moneymaker. And that was rap. That was rap and music. And if a DJ wasn't able to make the transition into producing, he was done. If the dancers and the B-boys couldn't find a way to be backup dancers for the rappers, they were done. Graffiti artists, forget about it. So all the things that I was more passionate about, writing, dancing, turntablism, because I always thought rap could kind of like stand on its own, which was true. I was more passionate about the other three elements. All those things started to just fade away, kind of like a fad, like a passing fad. They didn't pass away, they just went deep underground. They just kept growing and growing and growing and growing and growing. But they went underground. And by '86, my gigs that were just unending, nonstop from '83 to '85, those two and a half years, I was so busy and I was making so much money and I was making so much of an impact on the world stage. By '85, '86, all that started to fizzle out and the big boys came in. The Russell Simmons and the Def Jam and the Profile Records, all the labels started to exert their muscle, to flex their muscle. And people like me started getting kicked to the curb. And I, instead of getting too despondent or depressed or anything, I thought, okay, let me do what I always wanted to do, which was to make films. And so I enrolled into NYU Film School in the grad department and started right away making commercials and doing music videos for Dougie Fresh and for different artists like that. And I thought, man, I was on my way, man. I'm going to do what I did with Ruza Blue. I'm going to go into TV, I'm going to go into film and do these things. But kind of didn't turn out that way. Life is a very up and down thing for everybody.
Yeah.
Nobody escapes the oscillation and the vacillations of life, the ups and downs of life. Nobody escapes them. Nobody. And so when I was riding so high from '82 to '85, what goes up must come down. And by the '90s, when hip hop had really changed, and you can hear it, right? It's so different. When the music changed, dance was no more around. B-boys were gone. Here's another thing that's fascinating. I'd never really thought of that I was talking to Pex about. A powerful Pexter from the New York City Breakers. He and I were talking literally a week ago about this very thing. The issue was, it's slightly related to what I'm going to say, but the issue was why so many Puerto Ricans got left out of hip hop when they were such an integral part early on. Well, an obvious answer based on what I just said, you can extrapolate, was that, well, when B-boying got kicked to the curb, so many Puerto Rican kids in which B-boying was their biggest influence in hip hop, got kicked to the curb too. But that's not all. And I forgot about this until Pex who's Puerto Rican himself, reminded me. He said, Michael, don't you remember in 83, 84, a lot of the Puerto Rican kids who were into the park jams, who were into soul and funk and everything that the DJs were throwing down, that were into all the b-boy music, which was basically based on soul and funk, they got into Weibo. A lot of the Puerto Rican kids got into Weibo. Different fashion, a different kind of dance, different music, radically different music. Way more like Arthur Baker kind of 808 type sound, kind of dance music sound, and not funk beats, but more, more 808.
So drum machine style.
Drum machine,
music.
funhouse music, right?
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, you're right. And and the reason why that's so stuck, that was such a visceral memory for me when I thought about it was I remember back then when kids were getting into Weibo, and I was so concerned with getting hip hop out there that I thought this idea of getting into Weibo was interfering with that. It was confusing the situation. Why are you, what's this other thing? Just as we're getting hip hop out there, you're bringing in some new sound? What the hell is this? So I started to check out the sound. Like, what is this Weibo sound? And I didn't like it. So anyway, back to Graffiti Rock. So Graffiti Rock by 85, it wasn't going to happen. I went back to film school. What I was going to say, kind of interesting, just a nod to England, was as late, the 90s was a rough time for me. When I look back in the 90s, I did a lot of cool stuff that I'm proud of. I wrote a lot of things. I wrote the Basquiat film for Schnabel, for Miramax Films. I did a lot of good things. But in terms of hip hop, it was like a desert. It was a desert. And I was struggling during that time. I was like doing a lot of sofa surfing and, like crashing at people's homes because I didn't have my own apartment. And I refused to leave New York. That was another thing. Except I did leave for 1 year to DC, which was interesting in itself. But the 90s for me was a sad, heartbreaking, depressing desert of a time for me in terms of hip hop. And I'll never forget in 97, out of the blue, hearing from a guy named Mikey Blue Eyes. Do you know who that is?
No, I've heard of his name.
Mikey Blue Eyes, back in the 90s, was a club promoter, event promoter, a hip hop impresario promoter, and he had this festival in Folkestone, down on the cliffs near the White Cliffs of Dover, in Folkestone, in which he had this week-long hip hop convention that had dancers and writers and MCs and turntablists showing up. And he invited me as an old school hip hop, head to come and, he paid my way there, and he paid me to be there and to give a lecture or whatever. Forgot all the things that I did, but I was in the flyer, in the program. Put me up at a hotel where a lot of other kids were staying who were coming to the convention. And what the convention, and if you recall, back in the 90s was the heyday of hip hop conventions, in which people in England, France, Germany especially, Australia in a big way, there would be these promoters like Mikey Blue Eyes in England who would put on these conventions that would attract kids who were writers, dancers, MCs, turntablists, or just fans of hip hop culture, who would attract these kids from all over the world who would maybe save their money for a year. Teenagers, young kids, save all their pennies and buy a ticket and pay for a hotel room and the whole bit, and show up and spend a week you know, at for example, this thing that Mikey Blue Eyes did in Folkestone, the Fresh Fest, it was called. And I'll tell you a little story on the way out, as a way to end this interview. And it's apropos because it talks about my struggles as a hip hop artist and what I was going through in the 90s and how things come and go. So I'm there staying at this little hotel, little old Victorian building in the seaside town of Folkestone for this Fresh Fest 97 hip hop convention run by Mikey Blue Eyes. And there are kids, teenagers from all over the world who've come to this convention, and many of them are staying in the hotel I'm staying. And there's b-boy crews from all over the world, there's graffiti writers, you name it. And in my hotel was a crew from Warsaw, Poland, which is unusual. You know, I mean, you think of Poland, Warsaw, like, how did they get hip hop? They got it. They got it from people trading videotapes. And that's another interesting topic, is how people learned how to dance and how people learned a lot of these things in hip hop was the fact that they would take videotapes, VHS half-inch videotapes of mine or whomever. They'd find them, they'd copy them, they'd mail them to their friends in Japan, they'd mail them to their friends in Germany, whatever. They'd duplicate them, and you'd watch them at home and learn how to dance and learn how to rap and learn how to DJ. You'd learn these stuff. The virus would spread oftentimes through videotape. Anyway, I'm at this hotel in Folkestone, and there's this Polish b-boy crew. All these kids they couldn't be more than 17 or 18, some as young as 14. None of them speak any English. And they're saying hi to me, like clearly recognizing me. And I'm not really sure if they know me or if they're just being polite, or, you know, I'm much older than all these kids at this stage. I'm in my 40s at this stage. And one of these days, walking through the lobby of the hotel, these Polish b-boys are hanging out in the lobby for whatever reason, and they see me and they stop me. And they're like, no, you can't go anywhere. None of this is being said in English, just through hand gestures. And I'm like, whoa, what's going on? And they're like, wait. And they start moving all the furniture around. They start to move all the furniture against the wall. They roll up this old rug. Now there's this big wooden, beautiful floor. And when I think of this, I start to get a little emotional. Because this Polish crew went into a routine, step by step, in which each guy would do a different thing, that was step by step, move by move, routine by routine, from a New York City Breakers performance from years before.
Wow.
Off of Graffiti Rock, by the way. Just
incredible.
Not that we did routines, but there were solo moves. And one of them in particular, Action does. And he does this freeze where he's spinning and he stops in front of the camera and he's looking with this look on his face, like, yeah, what could top that type look on his face. And this Polish kid does this move step by step, from the footwork, from up rocking to the footwork to the power moves to the freeze. Exactly what Chino did, 12 years before? And I realized what they were telling me. They were saying to me in so many words, thank you. Thank you, because through your work from 10 years ago, 12 years ago, some of us were babies. Your work spread like a virus, even to us here in Warsaw, Poland. And you've given us our identity, our reason for living, because let me tell you, these kids were hardcore. Some of the guys who are doing head spins had bald spots on the top of their heads. They were 15 years old and they had bald spots. They were never going to grow hair again. That's how committed they were. And they were basically saying, thank you for giving us something, this gift of an identity, of a voice. You've given us a voice that we love and we'll never forget it. And I was so touched by what they were saying without words. That's the power of wordless communication. I was like, I said, I laughed and I smiled and I waved and I ran out. I ran outside and I burst into tears at what a powerful, beautiful moment that was, because you have to keep in mind, I was in a very down place at the time and I was feeling very depressed and lost and useless. And I didn't think about all the things that I had done, you know, and all the things that I created and how I'd been a part of this culture that had impacted the world. All I thought about was what a loser I am, you know, that I don't have my own place, or that I don't have any money in the bank, or that I can't get a job, or I can't sell my scripts, or whatever it is. And these kids, without words, said so much to me and showed me how much I had to be proud of and how much of an impact I'd made to these kids all the way in Poland. And I was so moved that like I said, I had to run outside and find a quiet place, and I just burst into tears. And I'll never, ever forget that. That was one of the most, that's the kind of thing that you look back and you say to yourself, you know, life is worth living because of that moment.
Yeah.
And I want to say thank you for letting me share this with your friends and your audience. And I'm going to let you go, man.
Yeah, Michael, what can I say? Listen, absolute incredible interview. I mean, you know, really kind of touching interview. And if anybody watching this, also please watch part 1, part 2, and part 3 with Michael. And also, Michael, I'm not too sure, but it might actually be worth doing a part 5 in about 5 or 6 months' time.
Maybe. Let's see.
And listen,
all right, man. Lots of love, Steve.
Listen, I hope you enjoyed the interview too.
I did. I really did.
Yeah,
I really did.
Listen, my man, hip hop takes our hat off to you, my man. Absolutely incredible interview.
Thanks, man. Peace.
Well, one more thing, Michael.
Yeah.
One more thing. Are you still in touch with Ruza Blue? You still in touch with Ruza?
No, I'm not. I haven't heard from her. Last time I saw her, I directed a show in Montreux for Tommy Boy Music, which was pretty amazing. So many great artists there. I was the director of the show, and she was there representing BAM, and that would have been 2010. That was the last time I spoke to her. But we had a good talk. It was good catch up.
Yeah, she'd make a great person to interview. But listen, Michael, what can I say? I'm absolutely blown away with with your history.
And listen, man, thank you, Steve, for letting me share it, and thank you everybody out there who enjoyed this. And God bless you. And peace, love, and soul. Peace, was it peace, love, and soul? Peace.
Peace, my man. Peace.